Good morning, ladies. We're going to get started here. I want to begin by thanking everybody for coming and thanking our vendors and attendees. By the way, my name is Lisa Keys. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Supervisor. I also want to thank Allison Carpy. She's our Commissioner of Housing and Human Services, and she puts in a lot of work. Allison is over here, wave. I'd also like to thank Sharon Boyd. Sharon, wave. Sharon is our Director of Women's Services. She has been working for weeks and weeks on coordinating this event, and she puts in a lot of time, a lot of hours, so she does a great job. I would like to introduce our Deputy Supervisor, Dan Panico, who will take it from here.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for coming out here to Brookhaven Town Hall on this soggy, cold day. I see a lot of warm smiles. I was heartened to come up and see so many people here today, so many vendors. We have an excellent program for you. This is our 33rd year in the town of Brookhaven. I can't say enough all of the good things that Women's Services do in this town. And the entire town board supports our Women's Services Department. Our Dress for Success program is nationally renowned. We try to help people, and that's what we do here in Brookhaven Town. We're a great town because of our residents, and our town government is great because of all the employees in this town who literally and truly care. So we have a great program here for you today. I want to thank our Women's Advisory Board for all of the work that they do. And I want to bring up Celeste Seamson, the chairwoman of our board, to offer some remarks.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to the Town of Brookhaven Division of Women's Services, our 12th Annual Expo and Conference. We have a great day planned for you, as many of you can see from the brochures that you received this morning. Would like to... No, thank you. We have a great day planned for you. Our keynote speaker, Regina Calcaterra, will start the morning off. She will then be followed by Catherine Dean, and then after lunch you will have Melanie Lippin. We would also like to thank our sponsors. Without them, we would not have such a success today. Our platinum sponsor, which is Brookhaven National Lab. Our gold sponsor was at Lupin Pharmacy. We have silver sponsors, JATF, Marian S. Rentel, PC, Stony Brook Medicine University Physicians, Jefferson Ferry, MBNB Bank. Then our bond sponsors is Stony Brook Medicine Center for Vein Care, Empire National Bank, ACE Marketing, Fetterman Financial Advisors, Inc., It Takes a Village Wellness, and Long Island Community. We also would like to thank all our vendors that we have outside of you. Make sure you take the time to visit their stations and maybe purchase something for them or learn something from them. And that would conclude our day for you. And at this time, we'd just like you to all enjoy your day and thank you for coming. Have a nice day. Panico?
And at this time, it's my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Regina Calcaterra, a person who's a brilliant attorney, who's experienced in both private sector work and government work, is renowned, a national speaker, a person who grew up miles from here, who still resides on Long Island on a North Fork, a person who goes around the country inspiring people, not just women, but men as well, a person with a compelling story, who's a New York Times bestseller, and has now collaborated with her youngest sister on a second edition of a book and her struggles and how her perseverance is an inspiration for everyone. It's my honor to introduce Regina Calcaterra.
Thank you so much, Deputy Supervisor. Good morning. I mean, to put together this amazing turnout definitely took a team. It always takes a village. And so I know some names were mentioned, but I just want to recognize a few people who I've been collaborating with over the past few months in their effort to actually put this together. I mean, first and foremost, of course, I'd like to thank Supervisor Ed Romaine and Deputy Supervisor Dan Panico. And the team that also worked on this is Allison Carpy, the Commissioner of Housing and Human Services, and the chairwoman of the Women's Advisory Board, Celeste Simpson, and most importantly, Sharon Boyd, who actually heads up Dress for Success. So I don't know if you've had an opportunity to take a look at the Dress for Success table out there, but what Dress for Success is, it's actually, it looks like it's a store. It's set up to look like Bloomingdale's. It's in here in the building, and it's for any woman of any age who's interested in getting a suit, getting new bags, getting new shoes, doing whatever you possibly can to be prepared for an interview or your job or anything else. And you know how much you have to pay for that outfit? Zero. Why? Because the 260 people who signed up to come to this today, your admission goes directly to Dress for Success, in addition to all the other donations. And they take donations of these, they've got these great designer clothes there, and clothes just for, that aren't even designer, but are very professional looking as well. So if you know someone who needs to take advantage of it, please tell them about it. And this is Sharon over here, who actually runs that amazing program. And when you go into it, it's very, very impressive. Okay. But most importantly, there is a woman here who I'd like to thank for the real reason why I'm here, and that is Lisa Whitback-Keys. Lisa is over there. So I'm going to tell you my story, and it's about growing up here in and out of foster homes, homeless shelters, living on the streets, stealing food to eat with my siblings, and how it is that we managed to survive. But one of the ways that we managed to survive was by sometimes staying with friends. I would have parents of my friends that would tell their children to stay away from me because I was a homeless kid. And I had other parents who found out if I was living in a foster home or wherever else I was living that would welcome me there because their children wanted me there and they would welcome me there as well. And by doing that, I was able to learn what a healthy home environment was. And Lisa and her family were one of those families. So Lisa is the Deputy Chief of Staff to Ed Romaine. So you have a fabulous woman here in one of the top governance positions here in the town of Brookhaven. So I just wanted to give a big shout out to my high school buddy. All right, so who here has actually had an opportunity to read I've written 2 memoirs. My first is Etched in Sand. It came out 5 years ago, and it's still nonstop. It's going nonstop. And the second memoir I wrote was with my younger sister. It's called Girl Unbroken. That came out 2 years ago. So first, let me ask you, who here actually had an opportunity to read Etched in Sand? Okay, great. Well, this is helpful as I share my story. And for those who did read it, I'm going to repeat my story today, but I'm going to give you a narrative and parts of it that are not necessarily like written in the book, and in a way that the audience could put together the different messages of my story. And who here has had an opportunity to read Girl Unbroken? Oh, wow, this is a committed group. Are you guys a book club right here? Okay, 6 in a row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my story with you, which most of it happened here in the town of Brookhaven. All of it happened in Suffolk County. My mother had 5 kids by 5 different men. She was mentally ill. She wasn't able to get any proper, medical care back then, so she self-medicated through drugs and alcohol. So here is this woman who was drug and alcohol addicted, couldn't take care of herself, let alone the 5 kids that she had. So what she would do is she would find us places to live. And sometimes we lived in homes or apartments, but we weren't there that long because we ultimately ended up getting evicted. And other times we would be living behind supermarkets, out of cars, on the streets, in homeless shelters, and when the authorities figured out what was going on, they would pick us up and separate us, because there was 5 of us, and put us in different foster homes. But when we were in our mother's care, meaning when we were not in the foster care system, she would find us these places to live, and she would leave us for weeks at a time. So we, as these little kids, had to figure out how it was that we were going to survive. And one of the things that we had to do was steal food to eat. That was the, primary, goal that we always had every single day. Like, how was it that we were going to get food to eat? And if the older siblings, I was in the middle, didn't have enough food, it was the younger siblings who would be fed. But we had to be very thoughtful about where and when it was that we got food. But it was a good thing that there was 5 of us, because you have enough to have a lookout, and that was my oldest sister, a decoy, which was Rosie, who was the baby, who was always cute and a good distraction. And then there were the siblings that were in the middle, one of which was me, and we each had a job to do and when we would do this. So what we would do is we'd go to a supermarket, and we would never go to a supermarket without change or a food stamp, because it would be too obvious for 5 kids to walk into a supermarket and not walk out past the register purchasing something. So what my job was to go to the back of the supermarket and go find the box boys. I know they're now called associates, but back then they were box boys. They were the ones who broke up the boxes. And I would tell them what I needed. I said, I'm moving and I need to get 2 boxes. And I was very specific. I wanted the egg carton boxes, the long ones. And I pushed the flaps open and I pushed one inside of another, and it would look like the boxes were empty. But as I was walking out, I knew exactly what aisles to go down, because I already checked it out on the way back. And I lift the top box, and in the bottom box I would put things that were flat, like a powdered milk would come in a plastic bag, and that would fit perfectly there. Or English muffins, or if we had an oven, Jiffy muffin mix, or macaroni and cheese, because they were flat. And I pushed the top box down, walk out like this, and it looked like it was empty, and I'd be out of the store. So we each had a different role, and it was also easier for us to steal food from supermarkets when it was the winter time, because when you're in the winter, we would have these big coats. Not that we purchased them, we were able to get coats because we would constantly go dumpster diving in the Salvation Army dumpsters, and we'd try to find the big snorkely coats, and we'd put holes in the pockets. And when you did that, you were able to take the food and kind of push it back if it wasn't too bulky, and kind of hide it that way. So that was easier to do than the whole box scenario. But in the summertime, I would have to kind of employ that box scenario that I just described. But what we weren't able to do, like I said, is actually leave the store without buying something. So my older sisters would be the ones that I would either have the coins or they would have a food stamp, and they would buy the one bulky thing that we could never ever figure out how to steal, but we all needed on a daily basis. What do you think that was? Toilet paper. It's exactly what it was, because the milk was powdered milk, right? So I was able to take it out that way in a bag, but it was toilet paper. So when you think about people who are homeless and people give food all the time, and they give the food in the bins, there's a lot of personal hygiene things that they actually need as well, that they're not necessarily maybe getting from a food shelter, that you may want to think about contributing. And it's the simple thing of toilet paper that is such a necessity. So that's what we would do when we were in supermarkets. Other place we would go to get food was we would go to farms, because this was Long Island, Suffolk County. This was the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and there was a lot more farms than there are now. So we would walk miles sometimes at nighttime to what we knew was to be the closest farm. And we would get to the farm, and we'd drop down on our bellies, and we'd do the belly shuffle, underneath where the vines and other vegetables were, grab as many as we could, and then we'd take off. And that worked all well and good until one day a farmer came out with a shotgun. And then we realized we had to change our MO. So another place we would get food that wasn't stealing, but that is plenty on Long Island, is beaches, right? You could go to a beach, you'll clamming, you can get mussels. We would do that on the way back. We would get that if we had a place where we could actually cook them. On the way back, we would try to find onion grass, and that would be our spices. And so that's one thing that we would do when we went to a beach. But the real reason why we loved going to a beach is because it was a place that we could fit in. Because you can imagine how we actually looked as these 5 homeless kids. I mean, nobody was telling us to take a bath. That's even if we had a bath or a shower accessible to us, right? We didn't always have clean running water. We weren't brushing our teeth because we were too busy stealing food to eat, let alone thinking about dental hygiene and stealing a toothbrush and a toothpaste. No one taught us how to blow our nose. And guess who was washing our clothes? We were, by hand. So you can imagine what they look like. So we weren't, we try to be well-kept kids because we were just thoughtful of our appearance and how it was that we looked, what we look like in the middle of suburbia here, but weren't able to always do it successfully. So we would have, like I said earlier, we did what little kids do. We were like puppies, right? Puppies want to go play with other puppies. little kids want to go play with other little kids. And there's this attraction. But sometimes we would have these parents out there who would take a look at us and tell their children to stay away from us. But, so we knew how different we looked. But when we went to a beach, what do you do when you go to a beach? You go there, you take your clothes off, you have your bathing suit on, you go in the water. We'd clean off. We looked like everyone else, except we were a tad bit thinner, of course. And it was our opportunity to play with kids in the water and on the sand. And we fit in. We didn't look that much different than anyone else. So these are some of the things that we did when to occupy ourselves and to get food when our mother wasn't around. But then when she would come back into our lives, meaning when she was moving on from her drunken binges and she wanted to come back just for a little while, she would then register us in school. But we were never in school too often for a variety of different reasons, because then she would leave us again, and one of us, we'd always have to figure out who was going to stay home and kind of take care of the babies, whatever home was. I'm saying that metaphorically. And so we weren't in school too often, but even when we were registered in school, we wouldn't be there for a long duration because my mother had so many warrants out for her arrest that she was concerned that if we stayed in the school too long, the police would track her down and pull us out. Now, it was very unlikely, because back when we were in elementary school, the only way to communicate was a yellow phone on a wall with a dial and a very long cord. So it's not as if every time someone went to go register their child in school, that someone at that school would pick up the yellow phone and call the police and say, "Can I have a criminal background check on this mother?" It didn't happen, but with her paranoia, she always felt like we couldn't be somewhere too long. But when we were in a school, that was one of the best scenarios for us. I mean, it was a great environment because you can imagine what it was like to walk into a school as a child in our situation. First, we'd be walking into a building that was temperature controlled. Warm in the winter, cool in the summer. We were walking into a place where the electricity worked, you had clean running water, and operating bathrooms. Again, not something that transient kids, really can take advantage of too often. And then, of course, as soon as the administration would take one look at us, what do you think they signed us up for? Free lunch. That's right. So at least we knew we could get that one meal a day. And then the other benefit that, of course, we received was receiving an education while we were there, even though we weren't there all too often, but we received an education. And since there were 5 of us, whatever the older ones were learning, they would teach the younger ones, so we were able to teach each other at home a bit, which now is called homeschooling. Back then it was just called truancy. But that was this great benefit of us being in schools. But when my mother would pull us out of schools, or it was the summertime, we had to find another place that kind of served that purpose that school did. Where do you think we actually would? We would walk miles to get to our local one. Where do you think that was? Public libraries. Think what a public library is for a child in need. A safe place to go. You could be there for hours. You could read. They can remove themselves from their situation by the books that they're reading. So we were 5 kids that would walk into a library. Now, it's not as if all 5 of us sat down at one time and read. I don't think that's ever happened in the history of any library, 5 children coming in at the one time and all sitting down and quietly reading. So we would need to find activities. We need to keep our younger siblings busy, and obviously they weren't of reading age yet. So what we would do is every time we go into a library, we'd scour the shelves to try to find as many highlight magazines as we could, because they were good activity books. And so some of us would entertain our younger siblings with that, while others would read, and I was a ferocious young reader. And it was a librarian who actually showed me a series of books called the Landmark series that was published in the 1950s for elementary age students on global historical figures. And that's when I started reading books on John Adams and George Washington and Abe Lincoln, and the list goes on and on and on. But I wanted to read books about women. And so the librarian showed me the 3 books that were published in this series of over 100 books on women that were born in the US. It was Betsy Ross, Dolly Madison, and Pocahontas. Can't deny she was born here, right? So we were down, so those are my 3 books. But I wanted to read more books on women, but because what I was getting out of the historical books that I was reading is I was reading about people who were born during very difficult times, had limited resources, had tremendous obstacles to overcome, overcame them, and managed to give back in some way. And that was the message in all these books. But I wanted to read more about women. So one librarian showed me a book on Amelia Earhart who wasn't in this series, but I read about Amelia. And then I couldn't stop reading about her. I read adult books on Amelia Earhart, everything I possibly could, because I was reading about a woman who was born during a certain era where societal norms were dictating what her future was going to be. She was told she's got to get married young and have babies, and she can't work. And she pushed back against societal norms, and she was gutsy, and she was fearless. And the reason why I resonated with her is because by the time I was 7 years old, I was already being told what my future was. I was already being told that I was going to be a drug and alcohol addicted teenage pregnant mother who was homeless, incarcerated, who beat up and neglected her children, because that's exactly who my mother was. And that is what people perceived that my future was going to be, because they stereotyped me that way, because they thought I was going to repeat the cycle. But then I would be reading books about Amelia, where society was telling her what she should be, what she's going to be. And she was gutsy and fearless. So I had these little seeds that were planted in my mind. So these are things that we would do to occupy ourselves when our mother wasn't around. But when she came back into our lives again, she not only neglected us, she abused us. And the level of abuse that my mother subjected us to was pure brutality. In this day and age, she would have lost custody of us right away. She would have been put in jail. But back then, it didn't work that way. When, for a variety of different reasons, but one of the things that would happen is that even though our mother not only abused us, but neglected us, we'd prefer to be with her. Because what would happen is when the authorities figured out what was going on, and they pick us up and they put us into different foster homes. And because there was 5 of us, and even though we had fantastic foster parents, and I talk about them in the book because I want to make sure people don't walk away from my story thinking that there aren't good foster parents. There are fantastic foster parents, but there are also horrific foster parents. And there certainly was back then, because they didn't get background checks. So you can imagine what it was like to put young children in the hands of people who didn't have criminal background checks. So unfortunately, some of my siblings and I, we were not only abused in these homes, but physically abused, but we were also sexually abused. So when we would get back to our mother, get back together under our mother's care, so she would win us back from the court. It was called a fair hearing back then, and she would succeed in getting us back, because she'd always want to get us back, because each one of us was a welfare check. So that's the way she saw it. She'd be doing the math, how much money she gets for each one of us, and what she could use that money for as far as like drugs and alcohol. So she'd always want us back. So when we would get back together, we would share the stories of what happened to us. And we realized that we'd rather deal with the devil we knew versus the devil we don't know. We'd rather stay in our situation with our mother just not around anywhere. And even when she does come back with the pain that she inflicts on us, we'd rather do that than be separated into foster homes. Because the one thing we realized is that what was happening to us in these homes was sometimes worse because we weren't there to protect each other. So at a very young age, my siblings and I made a pact that we would never, ever let anyone know how it was we were living. And when the authorities would show up, whether it was a truant officer or a social worker or a neighbor or the police, and they would ask where my mother was at 3:30 in the morning, we would say, oh, well, she's out delivering bagels because she works for a bakery, and she's got to get the bagels to the deli before 5 o'clock because the deli's open at 5. And we knew that because every time my mother had a job, she was never able to hold on to him too long, but every time she had a job, she would bring one of us because she didn't want to do the job herself. She wanted us working with her. So we knew the facts related to each job, so we were able to get these answers. So when we were asked where she was at 7:30 in the morning, we'd say she's working at a local deli making potato salad. Where she was during the day, we'd say, well, she's a real estate agent selling real estate or renting homes to people. Or that job didn't last too long, but the excuse that job provided us it was much more valuable. And then When we were asked where she was at nighttime, we would say she's a barmaid. So we always try to have an answer for where my mother was to try to prevent the authorities from coming in and separating us. So this is how we managed to live. And all of this was here in Suffolk County. And a lot of it was in the town of Brookhaven, some of it in the town of Islip. I mean, the homeless shelter I was in was in Patchogue. It was a place called Los Biondos. For those of you who are somewhat familiar with that place way back then. And many of the foster homes were here. I lived in Center Reach. I lived in Lake Grove, Patchogue, Rocky Point, many different places here in the town of Brookhaven and Islip as well. So all of this happened locally while it was that we were living on the fringe of society and trying to do our best not to let anyone know how it was that we were living. And we did the best that we possibly could. And then when my two older sisters got older, teens, because they're 3 to 4 years older than me, and I was about 11 at this time, they wanted to do what most kids want to do. They want to go be teenagers. And they didn't want to hang out with us anymore. They wanted to hang out with their friends. They wanted to sleep on their couch. They wanted to go to school, actually, because that's where they had friends. And they did what most older siblings do in this situation. When you have a family of kids where the older siblings are responsible for the younger siblings in this kind of scenario, at a certain point, they just want to go be teenagers. And they pass the baton on to the younger sibling and basically say, it's your turn. We raised you and the kids. And by the way, my two younger siblings, we actually call them the kids. And still to this day, when my older sisters and I refer to them sometimes we call them the kids out of humor. But, they raised me and the kids. And they just want to go be teens. So they would come in, wherever I was with my two younger siblings, they would kind of come back and forth and give money and make sure that we were okay. But it was tough. I mean, without them, it was difficult because it was a lot more difficult for me to steal food or do things when it was just me really being the parent of the two younger kids. So things got tough for a while. And when we did get food, I would just make sure that my younger siblings ate the food when I realized that that there wasn't enough for the three of us. And I would do things to suppress my appetite. And one of the things that I would do is I just started drinking vinegar. And I think because I like pickle juice, I realized when I drank pickle juice, it suppressed my appetite, like that filled me up. So I connected vinegar to that, and I just would ask people when they would say, well, what do you need? My sisters would come by or other people, and I say, well, get me vinegar because I use it for cleaning and I could put it on the lettuce. But the reality is that I was drinking it because I knew it would help suppress my appetite. The other thing that I would do is I started taking my mother's drugs, because she had two types of drugs. It was really easy back then. There was a drug that was called an upper and a drug that was called a downer. So I didn't want to take the downer because that was only going to put me to sleep. So I figured out which ones were the uppers and I started taking them. And I would find them because she would hide them somewhere, like she would hide food stamps somewhere, because we always would have her bag of things, her garbage bag of clothes. So I would go looking in there. So I started taking uppers, and as a result of that and the lack of nutrition, I really started suffering. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror just a few weeks before I think maybe 2 months before I turned 14, and I was wearing a tube top and shorts, and there was nothing left of me. I mean, I was just a bag of bones. I was skin on top of bones. There was no meat, and my skin looks translucent because I was suffering malnutrition, and I had bald spots on my head. Because when a child suffers from malnutrition, their hair comes out in chunks. And I also had some gray as well at the young age of 13. So my condition was pretty bad, and it was a few weeks after that my mother came back from one of her drunken binges, and she went to go beat up my younger sister. And the rule in our house is that if one of the kids are getting beat, you can't, like one of us, the siblings are getting beat, the other ones can't go in and protect that child because that child who's getting beat is then going to get beat more. So we always had to calculate at what point do we go in and save the sibling where we know they're not going to get beat more, just to protect them from a harder beating, because we would much rather absorb those beatings ourselves than watch one of our siblings get beat. So my mother came home from a drunken binge. She started beating up my younger sister, Rosie. And by that time, in my young mind, Rosie's no longer my younger sister. She's my child, because she's 6 years younger than me. And I was changing her diapers and giving her baby bottles and doing whatever I can to isolate her from what was really going on. And so when my mother went to go beat her up, I jumped on my mother's back, and my mother was a very large woman, mostly because of the alcohol that she was drinking. And I just described to you what I look like, so I certainly wasn't in a position to defend myself. And the beating that I got that day was probably one of the worst beatings I ever received, and I think it's really because my body couldn't absorb what was happening to me. And ultimately, my mother left. She went to a bar. I had to put the kids to bed and get them up for school the next day. And I got them on the early bus, and then I went on the later bus. And I went to school. And it was November, so I was able to wear clothes that kind of covered, as much as my body. And it was the 1980s. Actually, it was 1980, when big hair was in. And I had a lot of big hair. So I'd constantly put it in my face to kind of cover bruises and stuff on my face. So I was doing what I possibly could to, cover up all the marks on my body. And Mr. Brown, who was my social study teacher at the time out of Center Reach High School, because I was going to start at Center Reach High School, pulled me out of class and asked me what was going on. He told me I was failing in this class, and maybe if I told him my story, he'll help me pass. Or told him what was going on, he'll help me pass. And I didn't say anything, and I looked down, and I refused to have him. He was trying to see my face, but I know he already saw what he wanted to see. And I denied that anything was going on. So that day, when I came home from school and got off the bus, I saw something quite common in the driveway of this house that we were living in, and it was a 4-door gray sedan, which is what social workers drove around in back then. I walked in the house, and there was a social worker, a new one, because they rotated a lot at that point. And she started asking me what happened, and she saw me, and she looked at my face, lifted up my shirt, saw what was going on in my back and my chest, and she said, "Regina, you have to tell me what's going on." And I refused to. And I said what I would tell everybody, that I fell down the stairs, the iron fell on me, I fell out of a tree, I got in a fight with my brother, because I thought that these were original stories. But apparently caseworkers hear them all the time, so she wasn't buying them at all. And so I would tell her this, and she's like, "No, if you don't tell me what is going on, you're not going to survive, and your siblings aren't going to survive." And she was relentless, and she wouldn't let go, and she wouldn't leave. And so then she said to me, "You're going to be 14 in a few days." And you know what that means in New York? In 1980, a 14-year-old can emancipate themselves from their parent. I knew exactly what that meant because I was a street kid. And street kids know things about the law and rules. We knew at what point we could push a truant officer, at what point, what are they going to drag us into school, or how to avoid the police, and that you could run away at a certain age and no one's going to go look for you anyway because they figure, you're not coming back. We knew these kind of things, and one of the things that we knew is that we can divorce our mother at the age of 14. So I knew about emancipation. And so she said, if you tell me what happened to you, I can help you tell a judge your story, and then take those facts, and then if the judge agrees with you that you should be emancipated, then use it to relinquish your mother's guardianship rights over your 2 younger siblings, so at least they can have a safe family one day, and they'd be freed for adoption. So I caved. My 2 older sisters weren't there to kind of shut me up and make sure I didn't talk, and I told her the story for the first time. First time anyone really learned everything that we've been going through our entire young lives. She left. I put my siblings on the bus. The next day, I took the later bus again. And then when I came home from school, I saw the worst thing that a child that has siblings, that is in and out of the foster care system, could see in the driveway. I saw 2 cars. One of them took my younger sister, Rosie Norman, to one foster home, and the other one took my older sister, Camille, and I, which they found, to a second one. Again, we were separated. When I sat in that home for the first few days, my sister Sherry joined us too, and I wrote an affidavit to the judge, which they added their information into it, and we all signed it. I didn't know back then I was going to be a lawyer, but it could have been something I maybe foresaw. But I wrote an affidavit to the judge, and when we submitted it to the court, and I was placed in this home on November 6th, 1980. And it was going to take a while for it to, go through the process. But my mother went for a visit to go see my younger siblings at the foster home that they were in on December 21st, 1980. It was for a Christmas visit. She found out what I was doing. She looked at the situation that my younger siblings were in this foster home, and she kidnapped them. Stayed on Long Island a little while, and ultimately brought them to Idaho. So when they were still on Long Island, after she kidnapped them, and we realized that day what happened because my older sisters and I went to go visit them for a Christmas visit to give them gifts, and they weren't coming back. My mother wasn't coming back. We knew what was going on. We got on the phone. We started calling social services. We said, please help us. And basically the response was that, well, maybe this is good. Maybe she'll be okay with just 2 kids. Can you imagine? And the other response is that there's nothing we can do. A lot of us are on vacation. We have to wait till after the new year. So here we were, we knew exactly what was going to happen with them. That my mother, that the anger that she had placed on the older ones, she's now going to transfer to the younger ones. No one's going to be able to protect them, and how are they going to get food to eat? So we were in a complete panic, and we were constantly speaking with folks at social services and asking them for help. And ultimately, they gave her custody back. And then she took them and brought them to Idaho, where she continued to do what she was doing there. So here, what she was doing here, so here I was in this foster home, and I started at this young age figuring out how to call the police in Idaho, how to call schools in Idaho, how to track them down, because I figured out where she ended up, because there was a friend she had on Long Island that now lived in Caldwell, Idaho, and that's where she ended up. And I was making these phone calls, and I was telling people there, she's a horrible mother, she's abusive, she's neglectful, this is what's going to happen, please watch out for these kids. And she would go back and say, oh. And when they would ask her about like these complaints, my mother would say, oh, that must be my daughter Regina. You know, she's in a foster home, and she's a juvenile delinquent and drug and alcohol addicted, and she's a prostitute, so she makes up these lies. So it's very interesting how people just automatically believe because I was in a foster home that I was a bad kid, rather than maybe I had a bad parent. So they believed her. So here I was in this home, and I was there with my older sister, Camille, and we still had to get on with our lives, even though we couldn't control what was happening with our younger siblings in Idaho. So the benefit of being in this home is I was able to be in this home all throughout high school. I was able to go to the same high school for 4 years in a row. That not only gave me the great benefit of having these great friendships like Lisa Keys and her wonderful family, but also creating a bond with teachers. And so after I was emancipated, my caseworker would come over, and they still switched again often, but I would see them twice a year. After I was emancipated, my caseworker came over and said, congratulations, Regina, you're emancipated. But what this means is that when you turn 18, you're going to age out of foster care because your foster parents won't get money for you anymore, and there's a good chance that you're going to be homeless. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm going to be homeless? She said, well, a lot of kids in foster care, once they age out, they don't have an adult connection, they end up homeless. I'm like, well, wait a minute, but I'm freed for adoption. Won't someone want to adopt me? And she's like, no, people don't adopt foster kids, especially older foster kids. Can you imagine being a 14-year-old girl being told for the rest of your life you will never have a safe place to go to, you will never be able to put your head down in a place of comfort, you won't have a safety net, that you're alone in this world, good luck to you. But her solution was to teach me independent living skills. So if she taught me these independent living skills, I'll be fine. And it was basically a 17-point checklist that if I answered yes to the answer, she didn't need to train me. If I answered no, she was going to train me. So I won't go through all 17, I'll just tell you my favorite 3. The first was, well, when you're living on your own, Regina, you need to know how to pay, you need to pay rent. Do you know how to pay rent? I'm like, no. She's like, okay, I'll teach you that. Next question was, well, when you're living in an apartment and you're on your own, you also have to call up the power authority, which is local at that point. You have to call up local and ask them how to put the power on. Do you know how to do that? And I said, well, I've answered the phone enough times when local calls to say they're going to shut the power off. I'm pretty sure I could figure it out the other way. And she's like, no, I'm going to have to teach you how to do that. And then the other question, well, when you're living on your own, you need to eat and you have to go food shopping. Do you know how to go food shopping? And I was like, with or without money? So anyway, so while she was teaching me these independent living skills, I would be in school and bonding with these fantastic teachers, and that were somehow, like my 9th grade teacher, Mr. Kevin Ferry, ended up being a teacher for me in other classes as well. And then he somehow co-opted my social studies teacher, Mr. McGuire, and then co-opted my counselor, where the three of them would constantly be drilling in my head that the only way out of poverty was an education, that I'm smart and talented enough to go to college. And they were putting me on this path. They signed me up for every AP class that they possibly could do, and they would sign me up for ACTs and SATs and telling me I had to take these tests, which I had no idea about. I've never heard of them before, and were doing their best to kind of put me on their path. And they say, don't go to community college, you're smart enough, you should apply to Stony Brook University. I mean, just really setting a bar for me that I never thought. So I would go back to my caseworker and I would tell her, oh, don't worry about independent living skills, I'm going to be fine. I'm not going to be homeless, I'm going to go to college. She's like, no, I got to teach you independent living skills, Virginia, you're not going to go to college. I said, what do you mean I'm not going to college? She said, because foster kids don't graduate college. And you know what? She was right. Back then, less than 2% of the foster care population in the United States graduated college. You know what that number is today? Less than 3%. We moved the needle by 1 point. Because even if funding is available, how could we expect these kids to deal with the emotional aspect of college, the stress around it, to actually make it through and not give up and then go get a job, which would make their lives a little bit easier for the short term? And that's what a lot of them do. But I chose to ignore her and ultimately went on to, and listened to my teachers, and ultimately went on to college and got into Stony Brook University. But the challenge for me there is that back then, they've got a fantastic program for foster kids now. It's a model, but they didn't have it back then because foster kids didn't go to college, right? And so here I was living in my foster home. I was at this large university. Many of my classes were 100 to 1,000 students because they were the freshman classes. And I was working several jobs at once. I was dealing with the drama of what's going on with my siblings in Idaho, and I wasn't able to master this. But really the reason why I wasn't able to master it and started failing out, literally my GPA was like about a 1 after 3 semesters, the reason why is because I was missing that adult connection. My 2 teachers and guidance counselor who got me through high school and kind of put me on this path were not in this university setting. So my caseworker was right. I wasn't going to graduate college. So then I told a friend of mine who was going to SUNY New Paltz that I'm dropping out. And she said, no, you should apply here. And I'm like, first of all, I don't think they're going to be able to accept me with like a 1 point GPO. And 2, why would I even go there? I mean, I can't do college, I have to go get a job. And she's like, no. If you come here, it makes sense. Because 8 of us from high school are going to New Paltz. You have a safety net, you won't be alone. Now, I know if your child or your grandchild comes to you and says, I want to go to a certain college because I've got 8 friends from high school that are going there, the last thing you're going to be doing is letting them go there. But for me, it made sense. So I wrote this great essay explaining why my GPA was so bad, and I got accepted into SUNY New Paltz. They gave me a break. The door was open. They gave me an opportunity, and I got accepted through an EOP program, which is Educational Opportunity Program, which gave me a few $100s every semester to buy books. Now it's like so much more, but back then that's when we got it. I got it. So ultimately, what I did is. The first semester I was there, which was my second semester sophomore year, I decided I want to be a teacher. I signed up to be an education major, took all education classes, except I needed to take a class that fulfilled a history requirement. And the only class that would fit into my schedule was a class on international politics at 8:30 in the morning that I accidentally took. Because I don't think any 19-year-old in their right mind would take a class on international politics at 8:30 in the morning, but I did because it fulfilled a requirement. And the first day of the class, my professor was Mr. Lou Brownstein. I really thought I should drop out because what he wanted to know is who there in the class is actually registered to vote. And because we were all 19, and those who were registered to vote, who voted for the last, in the last presidential election, and basically no hands were going up. So he said, as a result, our punishment, it's not a word he used, but it was that we had to read President Reagan's State of the Union address in the New York Times. And I remember raising my hand going, what's the New York Times? So I knew with the side eye look that I got from him that this wasn't going to be a good class. And I was thinking about dropping out, but I'm glad I didn't. Because what I learned in this class changed my perspective on life. because I was angry about like what my living situation was, what was going on with my siblings. How come this is happening to us? How come I was dealt this hand as opposed to the hand that's dealt other people? Why I couldn't be in a good family? Why am I always struggling from day to day, not knowing if I could even get through the day? But then he taught us about how people lived in other countries. I learned how people live in Haiti and the Philippines back then under the dictatorship of Baby Doc Duvalier and the Marcos regime, how there was no money, there was no social safety net, there was no jobs. People weren't surviving, but the dictators were keeping all the money. I learned how women were treated in some Middle Eastern countries where they couldn't go to school. And I also learned how girls were, what their experiences were in some African countries, because many African countries are developed, but some that weren't. If they had a school, the boys went to the school, and the girl's job was to get up in the morning and go walk a few miles to the well and bring it back to the family. That's actually if they made it back. And after hearing all these stories and about how other people lived all around the world, for the very first time in my life, I actually felt lucky. Here I was, a kid who was in foster care and homeless, and abused and neglected and all this other stuff. I'm actually sitting in a college classroom 2 years away from graduating. And I realized that if my siblings and I were born into our situation in any other, or many of these other countries, we would not have survived. We would have been sex slaves, we would have been child warriors, or we just wanted to survive because there wasn't an adult willing to take care of us because they were too busy taking care of their own kids in poverty and in impoverished situations. So I felt lucky, so it really changed my perspective. So what I learned in this class changed my life. So I decided that I want to become a political science major. I signed up for poli-sci, took as many courses I could, did an internship up in Albany, did this other international debate, the Harvard UN. I was really just coming out of my shell, realizing that I could be empowered by something. I could be empowered by public policy and government. Because I learned what politics is. Now I'm not promise you no talk about politics here, but I learned what the definition is. The definition of politics is the allocation of resources. The allocation of resources, that's what politics is, and that's a definition in political science. And what that means is that why do people try so hard to run for office? Go through all these crazy things? Because they want to be the ones who are in charge of the resources, right? So I said to myself, one day, I want to be in charge of the resources. Because I was questioning who these people were that were making these poor decisions about what happened to my siblings and I. And how come these people over in Idaho aren't doing anything to help my siblings, and the people here in Suffolk County weren't willing to pick up the phone and tell them what was going on there. I wanted to be in charge of the resources. So I just made that promise to myself. So later on down the line, graduated college, started working in public policy, and had great opportunities because of the internships that were provided to me. But it was still tough while I was in college, because while I was there, I had to work 3 jobs at once while I was going to school. And I was able to get my GPA up, but it was still very challenging because I remember being really depressed all the time when I was in college because I didn't know how I was going to make it through. And sometimes I just wanted to quit because it was 3 jobs, it was maintaining, your education there and dealing with the other trauma that was going on in my life. But I made a promise to myself that every day I would get up out of bed, I'd walk up that hill to class. There really was a hill to class. It's the Hudson Valley. And if I got through that day, I'd be one day closer to my goal. So I just made these mini goals. Get through the day, get through the week, get through the 2 weeks, ultimately, and then you're gonna graduate. I graduated college within 4 years. I got my GPA up to 2.78, which was a big difference between where I started. I started working in the world of public policy. I was getting great jobs right away. And at a certain point, I'm working with lawyers, I'm working with architects as a 20-something kid. I think I should go to law school. Who was I as a foster kid to think about I should go to law school? I never thought about it. If anyone ever asked me what I want to be when I was younger, it was either a world-class gymnast or a singer. That's as big as it got. But law school, it didn't even occur to me because you didn't have that confidence. I should have never had confidence about the singing thing either. I don't know where that came from. But I did love Donny Osmond, so I wanted to be Marie. But law school wasn't anywhere in my mindset. But now I was in this world and I was doing fine. I was interacting with these people. I'm going to apply to law school. But how do I apply to law school with a 2.7 GPA? So I applied to law schools, all in New York and one in New Jersey, because I happened to be working in Newark, New Jersey. I applied to Seton Hall, and evening programs. Every law school rejected me except for Seton Hall because of my GPA. But Seton Hall accepted me because they've got a program like an EOP program called the LEO program, Legal Educational Opportunity, which I call the Affirmative Action Boot Camp. Because what they did is they accepted students into this program who either had an high LSAT and poor grades or vice versa, but they had a story, and the story explained why one thing was off. And they gave a few of us an opportunity, and they basically said, you're not accepted into law school, you're accepted into our LEO program, which was a boot camp. And it was summer, and you had to take 2 months off, and you had to go to school, and basically the very first day of this program, there was a professor that stood at the bottom, because it was a well, and looked up at all of us and said, the only reason why you're here is because no other law school accepted you. Which is true, because we had to take off 2 months of work to go to this law school to hopefully get in. So basically we had to, jump through the hoops that we needed to. If we passed those hoops and we got a B, we were accepted into law school. I was accepted in. I worked full-time during the day. I was going to law school at nighttime for 4 years, from 6 to 9:30 at night, 4 years in a row. It's not very fun. I graduated. I took the bar, and I was just turning 30 when I was going to find out whether or not I passed or not. And I remember going to my mailbox and waiting, because we knew when it was going to be mailed. Now everything's emailed, of course, and you knew if you got a thin envelope, you passed. If you got a thick envelope, it was a package for you to reapply. So I was waiting, and took the day off, and my mailman walked in and handed me my mail, and it was a thin envelope. I opened it up, I fell to the floor, and just started hyperventilating, crying, because 30 years of just struggle just left my body. And I realized for the very first time in my life, all I ever have to do is work one job. Right? Think about that. At the age of 30, I only have to work one job anymore. So ultimately, I went on, I practiced, I was practicing law, I was a partner in a law firm for about 8 years, very, very happy. A friend of mine runs for county executive out here in Suffolk County. He's our president county executive, FYI, Steve Malone. He runs, he wins, he asks me to be his chief deputy. And I said, what? You want me to help you run the county that raised me as a homeless kid? Guess who has the resources now? So, 2 weeks in the office, we know how to put on the lights, I know where the bathroom is, I know how to put on the computer. You try to transition in as much as you possibly can. Someone puts a copy of a newspaper on my desk, and it is Newsday, obviously. And Newsday, as you know, profiles Intel semifinalists every January. And on the front page of this Newsday was a young woman named Samantha Garvey. And she was profiled on the front page because she was living in a homeless shelter with her parents and her 2 younger twin siblings. And she said the reason why she's focusing so much on school, because she knows it's the only way out of poverty. And she focuses on her education to try to make an example for her younger siblings as well. And I read this and I realized she's in a homeless shelter here in Suffolk County. So, we had commissioners that were there from the prior administration, which was great because they actually knew what was going on at the time. We realized we had one house that nobody was living in, that was a subsidized house. It was a bit messed up. It needed some renovations. We were going to be able to do that in 2 weeks, and there was no wait list on it. So we kind of put together this plan about how it is that we're going to give her the house, because it was right near in an adjacent school district. Called up the superintendent, said, can she live out of district? Literally every logistic that possibly could be done was done by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. My boss puts out a press release, kind of announces that we're going to give this house to Samantha and her family in 2 weeks. And, the story goes worldwide, I'm not kidding you, and we had people donating everything, and she got new bathrooms and a new roof, all contributed by people and companies that were out there, and a lot of the labor was also free, and it was great. So we have this press conference, and within the next 2 weeks, Sam is invited to the State of the Union. I wasn't invited. She meets President Obama. I wasn't invited. And she gets invited on the Ellen DeGeneres show and gets a $50,000 scholarship to college, and I wasn't invited. But the great thing is that, because of all of this goodness going forward, it just kind of kept going forward. We gave her the keys. I thought that was it. I thought, I don't know how crazy it's going to be to run this county. It has, 1.5 million residents, had 9,500 employees, a huge, almost $3 billion budget at that time. This is massive. But I did have the one opportunity to help another child in need. And if nothing ever like this happens again, I will be more than satisfied that when I had the resources, I was able to do something. But what I didn't know 10 months later is that we were going to be hit by Superstorm Sandy. And as you know, we lost lives, and we had hundreds of families that were suddenly homeless. And it was my job in the immediate aftermath of Sandy to find these newly homeless families homes. It was the job of a child who was born homeless and was raised homeless and in foster cares in this county to find newly homeless family homes. That's the story of Etchinsan, and that's my story. It's a story of resilience, of optimism, of tenacity, but most importantly, it's a story about how we can all impact a child in need. So I'm going to very quickly tell you the 2 reasons why I wrote it, and we'll open up to Q&A. One is because there are 400,000 kids in foster care in the U.S. any given day. At least 100,000 of them are freed for adoption, and at least 26,000 of them every single year age out of foster care to nobody but themselves. And a large majority of those who age out end up homeless or incarcerated. Why? Because remember I was telling you how I stole food to eat? No one ever arrested me as a kid. They probably saw that I was a little child stealing food to eat. So they just let me steal the food. But if I was that 18-year-old who was then kicked out of my foster home because they weren't getting money from me anymore, and I had to go steal food to eat, I would have been arrested. It would have started my journey in the criminal justice system. No one would have been there to bail me out. And that's what happens to these kids. So I wrote it not only for them, but also the millions of kids in the US who are constantly asking why it is that they're dealt the hand that they were dealt. I wanted to say to them, yes, you're dealt bad hands. Because either you're neglected or abusive parents or whatever it is, you're dealt a bad hand. But be thankful you're dealt the bad hand here, because there are enough resources for you to, if you could figure out how to harness them, that will pull you up and out. And I kind of showed them the path: public education, public libraries, publicly subsidized colleges. You're going to have to work several jobs at once. Don't try to get a 4.0 GPA if you have this type of stress in your life. It's okay that you just graduate. And then you could figure out from there. Make mini goals. Get through the day, get through the week, just graduate, and then maybe thereafter you could figure out what your next plan is. I try to give them a realistic perspective from my experiences that you could do it, but it also takes a long time. The first time I was ever able to really breathe, it was when I was 30. And I say, so you can do it if you don't have a parent, but it takes a long time and it's going to be messy and imperfect, but you could do it. But the reality is that they can only do it. They can only take advantage of these resources if they believe in themselves. And that's the second reason why I wrote my story, is because I believed in myself and I was confident. And the only way that occurred was from the kindness of strangers. If you think about my story, I didn't have one adult in my life for a long amount of time that had that much of an impact. I had a lot of adults. I had teachers that were telling me that I was smart and talented. I had a 5th grade teacher, for the short time I was in her class, was constantly telling me this, wrote it in my 5th grade autograph book, and that I still have today, because every time I would go from foster home to foster home in this with a garbage bag, I would have 4 items in my bag. I would have my 5th grade autograph book, because anytime something bad was said or done to me, I would look back to see what Ms. Vandover wrote about me. She's still working in Smithtown Schools. She's still there. I had 2 pictures of my siblings, because nothing to me was more important than my 5 siblings. And I had little baby Jesuses, because I remember the very first home I was in that had something to do with baby Jesuses. So I held on to these little baby Jesuses that were given to me at that time, because I know that I was deserving of love and being cared for. So these little memories along the way are what carried me. In addition to that, I not only had teachers who were kind to me and librarians who were kind to me, but they were showing me the pathway forward as far as like professionally what I can do, how I can sustain myself. But another significant aspect of creating these options and opportunities that were presented to me by strangers were parents of friends. Going back to what I said about Lisa. I didn't know what a healthy home environment was, and I wouldn't have been exposed to it if I wasn't allowed into the homes of my friends. So if you think about this, that's the second reason why I wrote the book, is to remind people for that moment in time when a child in need is before you, how you can impact them. You have no control over their destiny. You have no control over their future. You don't know what's going to happen to them next week, but you control your interaction with them. You can do whatever you can to build up their self-esteem and build up their confidence. And that's how we could help these kids, and that's how we could help each other. You don't know what's going on in your neighbors, what's going on a daily basis, but just being kind and helping others with their confidence and self-esteem can truly make an impact. And that's the only way that I was able to make it through. So that's the theories behind and the messages behind Etch and Sand, is just to remind us all of the power that we actually have towards each other, and especially towards children in need. Because you may never know what happens to these kids, but they will remember you along the way. And if there's enough of you out there doing this, that's how a lot of these children are going to be moving on in their lives with the trajectory. So I wanted to thank all of you for being here, because you're here at this today to be empowered, to be inspired, to share with each other, to create your community or make your community bigger. And by doing this, this is how we change each other's lives. So thank you for coming here today. Thank you for contributing to Dress for Success. Really appreciate it. And I'm just going to open up to some Q&A. Questions? Yes. That was, the question was, how long did I go for not seeing my siblings in Idaho? They were moved to Idaho in about, I think, 1981, 82. I saw them after I graduated high school in 1988. I flew out there to go see them. And then after that, it was a long time. And what ultimately happened is we ended up just separating emotionally, because what happened to my younger sister is, the second book I wrote is my sister's story called Girl Unbroken, about what happened to her when my mother brought her to Idaho. She started really suffering from even though she remembered us and remembered the love that we had, also from Stockholm Syndrome, where she started believing the stories that my mother would be telling us about her, that we were bad and that we were evil and that we don't care what happens to her. Look, we're in New York having a great time and she's out here. So then she started kind of building up some resentment while she was trying to balance that out with the memories that she had as well. So it took her a while for her to come back around and to come back into our lives. And finally in 2009, literally in 2009, I got a Facebook message from her, because it was a long time before that. And that's what gave me really the inspiration to write our story, because I wouldn't have been able to write it if she wasn't in it, and if she wasn't back in our lives. So if you haven't read Etch and Sand, if you want to read Girl Unbroken after that, you could see what happened to her. But she was one of the most incredibly strong women that I have ever met. Another question? Yeah.
You said you were so good foster care.
Yes.
What reason would it be for you to leave that?
Oh, I was the question was that there were good foster homes. What reason would it be would there be for me to leave the home? I didn't voluntarily leave. My mother would win us back. The focus of social services, unfortunately, is to keep the family together. When you hear reunification, I think it's a code word for saving money. I'm just giving from my perspective as a foster kid. So the goal is to keep families together, but sometimes it's not in the best interest of children. And back then, it certainly wasn't in the best interest of children. So it was easier they would prefer putting us back in home with her than in foster care. You're paying for the caseworker, you're paying the payments to the foster parents. There's a monetary aspect to that as well. And their reunification was much stronger at that point. So I didn't have a choice. We didn't want to go. And so if you get a chance to read the story, you'll see how wonderful some of these parents were. Okay, so that's why it was not my choice.
Yes, how did you come up with the name Etched and Sand?
Great question. The title to the book, my sister Camille, I actually wrote, the entire story was almost written. Because see, when you deal with a publisher, because my publisher is HarperCollins, so if you're lucky enough to get your book published through someone like HarperCollins, they manage some of the marketing, the cover, the title, because this is their profession. It wasn't my profession. So you both have to agree on some things. And we had to agree on the title, and we couldn't agree on the title. So finally, the book is almost all written. And so we narrowed it down to 10 titles. And my sister Camille ended up having a massive stroke at the age of 48. And this was in 2012. And we were in Stony Brook Hospital. And she's fine now. But we were in the hospital that night. And we wanted to, change the discussion. And I said, you know what? Why don't we just talk about a title to this book? Here's a list of 10. And when Camille got to Etch and Sand, she said, I see that as a metaphor for so many things. One is that we, as the older siblings, try to create a safe environment for our younger siblings. And so we would create these homes, even if it was behind a supermarket, out of a car. And then my mother would come and knock down the home and bring us somewhere else, and we'd do it again. So she says it's kind of like the sandcastles. You go, you build it, the storms come, and we would just, regardless of how flimsy our situation was, we try to just always do that. But it was just the elements would just keep, as a result, keep forcing us to keep going back and doing that. And the other thing we would do when we was little, because we spent a lot of time at the beach, we had a lot of time on our hands, so one of the things we would write our names in the sand. So with the combination of those two, she said, let's just call it Etch and Sand. And that's how we got it. And by the way, after that, I contacted the publisher. I'm like, Camille is okay. She picked out the title. Good karma, let's not change this. And then we all settled on it. And that's how it happened. And yes. How are my other siblings doing? Well, I'll tell you, they have given us, me and all the rest of us, the greatest gift. They literally brought in 12 kids into this world without repeating the cycle and of abuse or neglect. And they have raised children who are compassionate, give back to charity, very caring, and very grateful for where they are. And the fact that that is the next generation of our family, and these cycles are not being repeated, I think is the biggest success of all of ours, that we could just kind of move on and not have to look back. So they're doing fine. My sister Camille, who was contributed 5 kids to that 12, her and her husband were married at the age of 19. Their marriage almost 35 years. They have 5 kids. Now they have daughter-in-laws and grandbabies, and they live here in Farmingville, and have always lived in Farmingville. So they're very well established here too. But the stories are great. I mean, they're doing well. So thanks for asking that. Yes.
I just have an interesting point to make. Jerry, my friend, gave me the book to read, and we read it a while ago, and we couldn't remember the name. So castles in the sand, something with the sand. And and then other things would come up, and then all of a sudden, I get the card from the town of Brookhaven.
Ah.
I could practically walk there. Right over Grady Road. So I pulled it up. I go, Jerry! Not only did I remember, I found the name of the book. I go, but she's going to be there, and we're going to get to see her. Because we cried through your book, and I worked for social service for 17 years. I know a lot of the
Yeah.
horror stories.
It's bad. Yep. But I will tell you some.
Thank you for sharing.
You are welcome. Well, the one great benefit of sharing it is really what has happened since the book came out. It's been out for 5 years. People have contacted me nationwide, because I speak nationwide also. So the book is, they've read it obviously, or they've heard me speak, and they've actually gone out and adopted older foster youth. Because one of the things I talk about in the book is a group called You Gotta Believe that works to get older foster kids adopted. They're in Coney Island, and they have an office here in Holbrook. And so people have gone out and adopted foster kids. There is a food bank in Smithtown, which after Pat Westlake, who runs it, read the book, she realized that they're making a mistake there. That when youth would come in without a parent, unaccompanied, and ask for food, they would turn them away. They would give them food one time, but they said, when you come back, make sure your parent's here. And they realized they're doing this to teenage kids who probably have other siblings at home. So they changed the rule never to turn a child away. And regardless of whether or not they're accompanied or not, they'd never do it. I mean, it's just this great impact. And then it reminds social workers and educators that no child is a lost cause. They're constantly saying, you just remind us why we need to continue doing what we're doing and get up every single day. Because if we're not there for them, then these kids have nobody at all. And then you've got the Riverhead Library, which I love this scenario. They were providing services for people who were homeless, but they couldn't take books home. Why? Because I was able to take books home when I was younger, when I went to the library, because I really didn't need a library card. And the only way you get a library card is if you have an address. You don't have an address, you can't take, right? You don't have a library card, you can't take a book home. They realized the problems with this, so they worked with the program. And one of the things when I spoke there was like, I always drill this in at libraries too, but they realized that maybe there's a way around it, and they worked with a group called Maureen's Haven, and which is provides services for the homeless out there. And Maureen even said, we'll be the address. And if they don't return the book, we'll pay the fees. That's it. So, but like little things that like when just sharing the story out there, that people start thinking about like foster kids or people who are homeless and how it is that they could actually make their lives easier. So I'm glad you appreciated, coming from where you were and what you have done, that you have appreciated the story as much as you do. So thank you. Etched in sand, remember? Okay. Yes.
I was wondering, two questions. How long did it take you for you to write the book, and what was the process like? Was it like the book wrote itself, where you struggled writing it? I was curious about that.
Well, I started taking classes because I'm a lawyer, so no one could read what I write. Right? So I really didn't know how to write memoir. I'm not kidding you. You can't write English. You're not taught to write English. Because if you do, then no one's going to hire you. No, I'm kidding. But so I really need to learn how to do it. So I started taking classes in New York City, and they weren't fancy classes. They were just classes that were offered like through a little gray magazine that was in a yellow kiosk on a street corner in Manhattan called Gotham Writing. And they were offered all over the city. So I started taking classes called How to Write a Memoir, How to Write a Memoir 2, Advanced Memoir Writing. And after those 3 classes, I met 2 women, and from that, and what we realized is that we can't take any more classes, we just have to start writing and meeting every week and critiquing each other's work. And through that, I wrote the first 4 chapters of the book, and from those first 4 chapters of the book is how I got the book deal with HarperCollins. And because I gave them those 4 chapters and did an outline, and then they had faith in me as far as what they saw positive with the book. But I was working for Steve Ballone at that time. I mean, I was chief deputy to the county, and I got the book deal in like March or April, and it was due in October, because that's what they do. If they give you any, like, a little bit of advance, like you got to turn the product around at this time because they want to see a return on their investment. So I had to write all the rest of it's only 4 chapters. I had to write the rest of the book by October, and then we were hit by Sandy, so then at least I got an extension to December, but I had to write it every single weekend. So once a month, I would sit down and write a new chapter, and I spend the next 3 weekends working on that chapter and hand it over to my editor, and then continue kind of writing it. But I had the great assistance of my sister Camille. So after I would write the chapter and we'd like tighten it up, I send it off to her, and then she was able to input some of the stuff that she remembers because she's a few years older than me. And it was hysterical. I mean, people asked me, was it cathartic? I'm like, no, it was entertaining. It really was, because I already processed this stuff before I wrote it down, but to like sit there and like remember all this and put it in details and realize, how was it that we figured this out? How did we survive as these little kids? I mean, you just start laughing at like our savviness. In our tenacity to kind of get through this, and some of the most ridiculous stuff, like my mother brought a donkey home into the apartment, which is definitely, and that went up a flight of stairs and put the donkey on the roof. So I mean, some of the weirdest things. So we were just, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. So the process, the first 4 chapters took me years to do, but then once I got the deal, I had to crank out the rest, pretty quickly at that point. But then I was comfortable with my writing style. But writing Rosie's was very troubling for me, because in order for me to write it with her, I had to learn every single aspect of what it was that she experienced. And I mean, I had to know it all to figure out how to narrow it down to see what we're going to put in the book. And that's when I learned everything that she went through, which she never told us. And that's why I have such admiration for her. That book was very hard for me emotionally. It was very cathartic for her, but it was hard. That was a lot harder for me to write as her big sister than it was for me to write my own experiences, which I think would be for anyone in that situation as well, learning the pain that someone that you love so much suffered. But for me, it was also a gift to her, because it was a gift to show the world how resilient she is. So I had different emotions based upon the 2 different stories, writing them. So thank you for asking that. Yes, oh, right in the back.
Okay.
Okay, just tell me again, what board you on? The Farmerville Residents Association. She's been a resident there since the 1980s, living in the same house. So, Okay, great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, and I will let her know. The offer was that since she's on the board of Farmingville Residents Association, that if there's anything my sister needs, to plug her in with you. So thank you so much for that. Yes. Yeah. He's doing okay. The challenge that he had, the question is, she's reading Rosie's book, she's reading Girl Unbroken. My brother is much more prominent in that book than he is in mine. And the question was, how is he doing? I mean, the problem with what we went through, the challenge that what we went through, I don't know if it's a problem, is that my mother never abused him, really. So she would abuse the girls, but not the boy. And so he was a young boy, so he would have to sit there and look at all the stuff that was going on. And like I said, it was much easier for us to be the ones absorbing the blows than watching the blows. So it really adversely affected him. I mean, that was a heavy heart that he's carried his entire life. And he still has that heavy in his heart as well. But he does have a daughter, Jasmine, and she's doing amazing. She's graduating Boise University. She's absolutely brilliant. So like I said, you know, we're still somewhat dealing, we all in our different ways deal with the trauma of what we experienced when we were younger, but we haven't let it affect the next generation. I think that's the one that's the most important. So thank you for asking about him. We'll take 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up because we do have a day to start with. Go ahead.
Strength.
Thank you.
And my question is, have you been able to make peace with your mother?
My mother died in 1999 and started out with like a liver cancer and kind of like built there. And I felt like I didn't need to make peace with her because I didn't love her and she didn't love me. It was a very transactional relationship, which you'll realize, you know, if you get the chance to read the book. And so I didn't feel a need to make peace with her. So it didn't bother me when she died. Actually, I was relieved that this kind of gray evil was out of all of our lives. But I would have never been able to forgive her, not for what she did to me, for what she did to my sister. So that is something that I still have heavy in my heart. But my sister, Rosie, did forgive her because she needed to do that. So she forgave her on her deathbed, but Rosie needed to do that in order for Rosie to heal. So she came to peace with that. So that's all I could ask for. Yes.
Social services, and there's a lot of criticism about social services enabling people rather than helping people. And you seem to have really been helped by a lot of people. Can you help us explain that to people?
I think I was able to be helped by a lot of people just because what they did. But some of them, you know, there's people in every single profession that are good or bad. And there are good social workers, there are bad social workers, good teachers, bad teachers, you know, good lawyers, bad lawyers. Admittedly, there are good authors and bad authors, right? So it was the more of the people who are kind that have positive touches on these individuals, it's not enabling them, it's giving them you have to build up their self-esteem and encourage them and tell them what they can do and allow them to start seeing themselves in that situation. And I will tell you, you know, this is an odd thing and it could be controversial saying, I was motivated to graduate college in 4 years because I knew at the age of 21, my money I was getting from foster care, which was like $400 a month, which helped me pay rent, was going to be cut off. So having that goal, knowing that I had a short amount of time to achieve something, was something that motivated me. And so you've got to think about, you know, but the problem I always say is that you never want to really limit any kind of subsidies to people because ultimately it's going to affect the kids. Right? It's always, if my mother was ever cut off, we would have starved to death. And you never know how much it's going to affect them. So there's no perfect system. So it's not as if, you know, it's that blanket statement that social services or social workers enable people, they're not in control. You're doing the best that you can in this scenario. And some people are going to take advantage of it and some aren't. Just like you have people taking advantage of handicap parking and some don't. You know, there's good and bad. So you have to do what you can thinking about the next generation, how this is going to affect them. And hopefully help them, provide them the resources they can to kind of pull themselves out. But you can't cut it off. And if you can't cut it off, yes, you're going to be enabling some people, but you're also going to keep all of those alive.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, just go over here. And I know I'm neglecting some person over there. And then I'll stay here afterwards, but I know we have a program to go through.
Have hope to change their lives, and I as a teacher have my own story that I tell the children a lot, and I get chastised by other teachers that why are you telling them those things about yourself, but it definitely helps children believe in themselves. And if you were willing to write another book aiming at children to break the cycle, because I know that's a huge problem, is that they don't break the cycle. They just continue in their misery and
In their
then
darkness.
they pass it on.
'Cause it weighs
so if
them
you're ever
down.
willing to write another one, if you could please aim it at the children.
At young adults.
Yes. That's
Thank
my
you.
question.
Okay, I'm going to take one more over here and then I'll stick around. Really? Okay, right there. Your hand was faster.
That's really an idea. Maybe you give you another job.
I know. We're trying to keep it down to one again.
They have access to libraries, and you have access to libraries in schools.
Mm-hmm.
This is all about
Yes, it is. It's about building up their confidence. So I'm going to leave on that great note. So thank you very much for coming today. If you're interested in getting the book, I know it was given out to many people who first registered here, but it's pretty easy. You could go to my website. It's my name, ReginaCalcaterra.com. There's only 2 of us in the world. One is blonde, in her 30s, and living in Argentina. So you figure out which one is mine, but you could also go on Amazon and many other places as well. So thank you so much for being here. Have a great day. I hope you're walking away inspired. Thanks to the town of Brookhaven, and again, to Miss Lisa Keys.